From the European Parliament in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have on the program. Trump versus everyone. Divisions laid bare at the G20 summit that was supposed to focus on climate change. Merkel concerns. The German chancellor is seen shaking in public for the second time in just over a week. Powder keg. Today is the day Iran said it would surpass limits on uranium. So what happens next? Power play. The latest on the race for Europe's top jobs ahead of a critical summit this weekend. And laugh through the tears. Theresa May is the butt of her own joke in tonight's Raw Moment. All right, it is time to meet our panelists this evening. We have, of course, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. So, Darren, which of these stories are you watching very closely?
Well, as you may well have seen, it is who potentially is going to become the next Commission president. You thought it was hot outside in Europe. It is also hot in the corridors here as they try and work out pretty quickly who might take over from Juncker and indeed Tusk.
And we only have a few days to find that out anyway. Anyway, also joining us tonight, Jutta Gutteland. She's a Swedish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats group. What story are you watching, Jutta?
It's Iran. For me, it's always the interesting topic, and we see the tensions, and we need to make EU take the stabilization, be the factor that will make it more calm. Stabilize.
Okay, and also joining us in the studio tonight is Witold Waszczykowski, a Polish MEP-elect and former Minister for Foreign Affairs from the Law and Justice Party. What about you, Witold? What story are you watching closely tonight?
Well, as a former ambassador to Iran, of course, it's natural for me to follow the situation in Iran and around Iran. But, of course, as a new member of the European Parliament, I would like to see who is going to rule the whole institutions in the next 5 years.
A lot of stories to cover tonight, but let us begin with the G20, because leaders have gathered in Japan, and with the summit starting already tomorrow, well, the heads of the world's most powerful nations will discuss some of the most pressing economic and geopolitical issues. But the real action is expected to take place on the sidelines. And one of the most anticipated meetings will be between the U.S. President Donald Trump and China's Xi Jinping, amid hopes that they can reach a deal and put an end to the ongoing trade war between the two countries. Rising tensions with Iran will likely be one of the hot topics as well of conversation, and we can expect Europe's key players to continue the debate over who gets the EU's top jobs. Okay, so let us cross over live now to Japan, where our correspondent Vincent McAviney is joining us. All right, Vincent, the G20 leaders gathering, what is at stake in this, or what are we looking out for?
Good evening, Tessa. Well, all of the leaders of the world's 19 biggest economies and the EU are gathering here tonight in Osaka for this conference, and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe gets to set the topic. So it is the world economy, climate change, inequality and digital issues. But at the moment, the one that is top is a country that isn't even here, Iran. There is a lot of speculation as to what is going on in the country, whether it will breach the JCPOA nuclear deal signed back in 2015 by enriching more than their allowed amount of uranium, and what the repercussions of that could be. Now, of course, America withdrew from that deal. There is rising military buildup in the Gulf. Those tankers were hit. That drone was shot down of the Americans as well. Donald Trump has been sending out some fierce warnings, talking about obliterating Iran and saying more sanctions are needed. But the other leaders here are saying resolute. And Europe's side as well, Germany, France and the UK, there'll be a joint message from the leaders of those countries saying that the JCPOA is the best deal and that trying to get America back on board with it. And they're calling for a sort of demilitarization, a calming down in the zone. So we'll see how President Trump responds to that. When it comes to the world economy, well, really, it's going to be all about trade, and specifically the US and China. As you mentioned, President Xi Jinping and President Trump meeting on Saturday. There have been some signs. President Trump revealed earlier in the week that there were talks that are ongoing. They could have some kind of breakthrough, but there could be a sticking point, and that is Huawei, because the US is still very much opposed to having it in its telecoms infrastructure and is making sure allies as well don't get on board with it. There's a bit of a split with the UK, for instance, on it going into the UK's new 5G. And then if you turn to other issues, well, climate change will actually get quite a bit of a hearing here because the G20 is responsible for 80% of the world's greenhouse emissions. And Theresa May, on her last trip over seas at a big event like this, I was on her plane earlier, and she was talking about how she goes hiking every year in Switzerland, and she noticed over the past couple of years that the glaciers were receding, and that's what convinced her to become the first major developed country to implement a net zero carbon law by 2050. So she's going to be leading the discussion on climate change, talking about what the UK is doing. We've been off coal-fired power now for weeks, so there will be some discussion of that. And Prime Minister Abe as well wants to talk about single-use plastic because Japan, of course, loves its seafood, and that stuff is really getting into fish stocks. So there'll be a full range of conversations here, but I think, as you mentioned, Iran and trade are going to be the two big ones.
Thank you for that, Vincent McAvenny there, talking to us from Osaka in Japan. All right, when we look at all those issues that Vincent was bringing up, there's a whole host of issues, the main ones, clearly very divisive ones. Is this the most divided G20 that you've ever seen, be told?
No, I don't think so, because there is no problem like activity of Russia against Ukraine on the agenda. So there are issues which can be solved in a peaceful way. The climate situation, it's not the idea which will solve just overnight. We need time, we need technology, we need some money to spend slowly.
I mean, we will definitely get into the climate conversation a little later on. And what about the foreign policy issues that we're seeing on the table when, you know, you seem to always have the US on one side and different groups of other countries on another side? Is this the division that we are seeing in the world order, almost?
I mean, we're not used to have this unpredictable leadership from
I think unpredictability is a key word
from
here.
the United States. We're not used to see that kind of provocative cavalier tweets coming out from the White House almost every week now. So I think absolutely that's a big problem. And I don't think that should say something to us to be in the same way. We need to, on the contrary, show that the EU is a very mature union that will be predictable, that will handle situations to calm down, to make tension solved. And
can I disagree with this? Because I do not portray Donald Trump as an unpredictable leader.
Okay.
I think he's peaceful-oriented. Look at this relationship with North Korea, for instance. Look at the situation with Iran. He is not threatening any
Well, he did pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, which, again, we will get into the details there later.
We will get to.
Okay.
Look at a very careful situation between the United States and Russia. Look how he's trying to improve the situation of our part of Europe, I mean Central Eastern Europe, by deploying additional troops to protect us and by signing additional deal to improve our economic cooperation and energy cooperation.
That is one, one way of looking at it. I did read
I disagree with you saying that Trump against everyone against us. No.
All right.
Well, let's look at it. Okay, so Donald Trump, before he's gone, has attacked the EU and particularly the competition when it comes to American technology companies, which the Commissioner...
I believe he said that Europe is treating the US worse than China.
He's lashed out at India about the tariffs they imposed in their bids. He's obviously potentially on the verge of a trade war with China. He also attacked Japan, the hosts, suggesting that they wouldn't step in if the United States was attacked in war, that they would rather watch the war on a Sony television. And in addition to all of that, his deal with North Korea is essentially all but dead. And he was on the precipice last week of attacking Iran. He decided to change his mind at the very last moment. Now, I'm not suggesting that President Trump is not a peaceful president and may not at all actually get involved in war. To say that he is not willing to attack and lash out at his allies, his traditional allies, like Japan, like Europe, and also take on a very aggressive trade war, potentially, with others that could be detrimental to the world economy, I think you have to say that's possible.
I'm not the spokesman of American president, of course, but I think that he's trying to at least to make a balance in economic relationship between the United States and the rest of the world. For years, it was a very unbalanced situation.
Okay, Jutta.
I don't want to speculate about him as a person, but I can see that every week we have new rubrics in the media that shows that he's very aggressive in the tone, and that also escalates conflicts. And when it comes to the Middle East, it's of course worrying to behave like that. I believe the opposite.
But let's say that Trump is much worse than President Putin. Yes, is worse than President Putin to Europe. No?
Okay, look, you disagree with...
Because this is a very common opinion, especially in the western part of Europe, that Trump is a more danger to Europe's security than Putin.
Okay, but we'll go back to the topic that you talked about earlier. For example, because you disagree that he is putting the U.S. on one side, but on certain issues like climate change, which you brought up earlier, he is on one side. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Well, some 200 countries signed on to it, so that's certainly a subject that is divisive and contentious. And so that's one of the key issues that they're discussing at the G20. And someone who has really spoken out loudly over this is the French President Emmanuel Macron. He threatened not to sign a joint agreement that's going to come out of the G20 if the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement, is not in it. So let's take a listen.
C'est le moment pour véritablement être enfin au rendez-vous de l'histoire et de notre propre responsabilité. J'entends partout à travers le monde des gens qui disent « j'ai des lignes rouges, si on parle de ceci ou de cela, je ne signe pas ». Moi je l'ai dit, j'ai une ligne rouge. Si on ne va pas plus loin sur notre ambition climatique, ça veut dire qu'on se réunit pour rien. Et nous le partageons avec le Premier ministre Abe, nous tenons au G20, et donc nous nous battrons pour avoir un texte ambitieux.
Okay, so there you go. Emmanuel Macron trying to say that that's quite a threat. That's his red line. What do you think about this, putting that as a red line at G20?
I think we certainly need an ambitious G20 that will present that they promise to deliver. And I think we should not threaten with the Paris Agreement. I think that's a very negative way of dealing with it. I think the opposite. We need to show that the EU will deliver, that we will be more ambitious during this legislation period, and that France is taking the leadership.
Okay, all right, so those are the issues that are on the table. Leaders that are there, of course, we already saw that Angela Merkel is there, but there were some doubts earlier, actually, if Angela Merkel of Germany would even make it to the G20 summit, because she was seen shaking for the second time in less than a week, in 8 days, I think. So Alex in the Cube has more on this story. Alex?
Tessa, on the 18th of June, here was the German Chancellor Angela Merkel with Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, where she was seen visibly shaking. This was during a national anthem. You can see her there visibly shaking, in fact, her whole body shaking there. Now, this got a lot of people talking at the time. She, at that occasion, the Chancellor saying she was dehydrated, she had a glass of water, then she felt fine. Well, this was today, standing alongside the German president. And once again, you can see the German Chancellor here clasping her hands together this time, but again, once again, visibly shaking. Now, we know from her staff that they said after this time she was offered a glass of water on this second occasion, but this time refused it. And her staff afterwards said, nope, she was fine. Here's a photograph from the conclusion of what was a ceremony saying farewell to a member of a German politician who's off to a new job in the European Parliament. Angela Merkel's staff saying, no, the Chancellor's fine, she's off to the G20. And when we look at this story, we are in the midst of, Berlin is in the midst of a huge heat wave. Germany, in fact, the whole of Europe really experiencing this heat. So some people saying, is this really news? Is this an undue swooping in on the privacy of Angela Merkel? Is this getting in on a woman's personal health conditions? Well, that is a debate that the media have had as well. Melissa Eddy here from the New York Times said initially the New York Times did not cover this story, saying it wasn't really something they felt was news. Now, though, this second incident in less than 10 days, that has got them talking. It's got it onto the front page on this article here of the New York Times. A lot of discussion there on internet front pages around the internet. And then we've got people like Angela Merkel's opponents in the AfD seizing on this. Some of them here, like Andrea, saying the Chancellor's not revealing the full scale of her illness. Now, something, of course, her team dismissed. They say there is no illness. And then you've got other people, though, who are more compassionate. Holly is a journalist in the UK saying, if Angela Merkel has something to tell us about her health, she'll tell us. Until then, it's none of our business. But once again, the reality is Angela Merkel's health and well-being has got people talking, but her team saying she is fine, despite this second incident of shaking, and she is going to the G20.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and her team in the Cube. I mean, the video was quite hard to watch, both videos. Her team, again, as Alex said, closing ranks, saying, no, everything is fine. Do you think, are they being transparent enough about her
I think
health?
the problem with this is, of course, everyone is entitled to privacy,
Sure.
particularly when it comes to the issue of health. Even if you are a world leader, I mean, as long as it's not an absolute serious health issue. I think the problem here and why this might be being dealt with in a bad way is that the first time round, we were told that this was simply got to do with dehydration. And it was very hot in Germany on that day, and she was stood outside for a long time, and that was an understandable explanation. This has happened again today. Inside, it's 25, 26 degrees in Berlin today. It's not that hot, yet it's happened again. And so the question then will rise up, well, this simply isn't just dehydration. This is something else. And when you then get into that cycle where people feel that the full truth's not been revealed, even if there isn't a full truth, I think in these circumstances, the German people probably are owed an explanation, are owed some type of kind of medical situation.
Right.
The main thing is we don't know what.
We don't know, sure, we can't speculate at this moment, but yeah, it's twice already in 2 days that we saw Angela Merkel shaking. So there you have it, in a few weeks, okay. Right, moving on. Today is the second day that NATO defense ministers meet in Brussels. Under the spotlight is Russia and its alleged non-compliance with the INF Treaty. This prevents the development of certain missiles. Now, dating back to 1987, there are just 5 weeks to save this treaty, which looks set to collapse. Now, here is the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Let's listen.
Ministers have agreed today that NATO will respond should Russia fail to return to compliance. Ministers confirmed today that we have no intention to deploy new land-based nuclear missiles in Europe. We will not mirror what Russia does. We don't want a new arms race.
So tough words from Jens Stoltenberg. And Darren, you spoke to a defense minister today at the NATO headquarters.
Yeah, I went out to NATO a little bit earlier, and I spoke to the Latvian defense minister, who's also the deputy prime minister, and I started actually by asking him if he thought the INF Treaty was essentially all but dead.
Well, it seems dead because it's just like the dead dance. If you want to dance, you need two. One part is away. So I think we have to look for the new solution, and definitely we need a new solution. The question is, does everybody from participants are ready to negotiate and to find agreement as soon as possible?
When you say we need a solution, there's only 5 weeks. Can a solution be found in that short period of time?
No.
So what happens then?
It can't. Well, I think we will be engaged, or the West and Russia will be engaged in a lengthy and very difficult discussion.
But what people also don't want to see is a new arms race, a new nuclear arms race. That's possible, isn't it?
Well, of course it's possible, and at this moment it's happening, because if you are looking to the Russian military spending compared to the Western spending or European spending, then Russia has been rising its military force for the last 10 years, just like China. And the West started to respond only now. So the big question to the Russian side is, once they started their military race on their side, would they think that we will just keep silent?
Is the solution to this creating an EU army? Is that something you would be in favour of?
Well, I think that we should forget, or let's say, yes, we should forbid to speak about European army, because this is just a dreaming. European Union is not capable to replace NATO, and European security, first of all, depends on each and every nation here in our cooperation within NATO. Americans have been paying more than 50% of all the expenses. So why should Europeans not be ready to spend on their capabilities and on their defense the equal amount as Americans? Why should Americans pay and we not? I mean, if you look to the Baltic states and to Latvia, our relationship with the US is perfect. We are suffering because some other countries in European Union are not anymore in such a good position to argue with the United States. But I think we should look not first of all for the mistakes across the Atlantic. Yes, we see a lot of things we would disagree, also me. But at the same time, I have been always taught to start with ourselves.
Witold, how worried should EU governments be about this development?
We are worried because for a number of years we witnessed first Russian aggression against Georgia more than 10 years ago. 5 years ago, Russian aggression against Ukraine, annexation of Crimea. Then we witnessed huge military maneuvers, like Zapad maneuvers. Last year there was even bigger maneuvers, Vostok maneuvers, where 300,000 Russian soldiers were exercising. They are exercising, even they simulating the nuclear attack against Warsaw. So that's why we have to have a very good relationship with the United States, because this is the only country from NATO members who is able and willing to help us to keep the security of our part of Europe.
But when it comes to the INF Treaty, Russia has long complained that, okay, it signed on to it, but countries like China, India, Pakistan, Iran, they are not. I mean, this is a valid complaint from the Russian side. And, well, considering how the Iran nuclear deal is going, that doesn't seem very promising to get everybody on board. So, I mean, Russia's side in this?
I don't want to take Russia's side, actually. I think we need to be firm
But
in the EU.
is it a valid point that they're making as well? And they
No.
Okay, go ahead.
I would say that I can agree that from the EU point of view, I'm not speaking on behalf of NATO. I think it's very important to be firm against Russia, to be consistent, to be together, and to make sure that we take threats seriously. We will never accept their behavior and their threats and the way they simulate things. We will keep together. But on the other hand, when it comes to the NATO, Sweden is not a member.
Yeah.
For me, it's important to respect the NATO membership.
But Sweden is part of Council of Europe, and 2 days ago, Council of Europe accepted Russia to bring her back and grant them again voting powers.
In terms of the arms race, for example, what the defense minister was talking about.
Yeah, and the West has to accept some sort of responsibility to that. We know that President Trump is going to open a temporary base in Poland over the next few years, welcomed by the Polish government.
Is that provocation?
Is that part of an escalation on both sides?
No, it's a response to the escalation of a Russian activity.
But an escalation goes on both sides. And when we get into spheres of influence about where certain countries in certain parts of the world feel that they have a sphere of influence. Yes, you talk about how the United States is there to protect Poland, but let's look...
You grant Russia the sphere of influence in Europe?
Well, just hold on a second. The United States clearly thinks that Venezuela, for example, in Southern America, is part of its sphere of influence. Russia has clearly felt...
Who sent troops to Venezuela? United States or Russia?
I'm not here to defend Russia. I'm just clearly pointing out that I think
there is another
clearly with what has happened in history, that Russia does view parts of Eastern Europe within its sphere of influence. And all I'm saying is, yes, of course, Russia has helped to escalate things in Eastern Europe, but clearly a Western response potentially could make that worse.
All right. OK, we have a lot more on the program for you tonight. Caught in the middle, why US-Iran tensions are making things awkward for the EU. Plus, also on the program, a little self-deprecation goes a long way. Theresa May pokes fun at herself in tonight's Raw Moment. Welcome back to Raw Politics. As world leaders meet in Japan, Iran could be about to breach the 2015 nuclear deal for the first time, pushing Europe to try yet again to de-escalate tensions with the U.S. Now, a year after the U.S. quit the accord, remaining members will meet in Vienna tomorrow in a last-ditch attempt at making sure Iran remains a member. Tensions between the two countries could be at an all-time high, with the U.S. president threatening Iran with, quote, obliteration, while Iran says the path to a diplomatic solution has closed and it will no longer shoulder the burden of the deal alone. All right, let us cross to London now for more on this. I'm joined by Ellie Garan-Maya. She's a senior fellow with the European Council on Foreign Relations, specializing in foreign policy in relation to Iran. And she's also advised governments on nuclear negotiations. All right, thank you, Ellie, for joining us tonight. So obviously, Europe has been trying to play a mediator's role in this. They've been trying to keep Iran on side, trying to find ways around to soften the blow of the U.S. sanctions. But is Europe really ready to de-escalate, and more importantly, capable of de-escalating the situation?
Well, I think that the Europeans have been very sincere about this outreach with both Iran and Washington over the last 2 years, frankly, since President Trump came into office, to try and ensure that this nuclear agreement, which was a historic achievement, sticks and outlasts the current tensions that we're seeing. Now, the willingness is, I think, clear, but the capability has been less clear. And the European governments that are party to this agreement have faced a number of hurdles because primarily US secondary sanctions have constrained the ability of European governments to have frankly, an independent foreign policy and economic policy. Now, there's a series of steps that European governments have been taking over the last year to try and dent the blow of these US sanctions, to try and persuade Iran to remain in the deal. Now, Iran has set the clock ticking for Europe to deliver, and that's coming to an end, the 60-day period that Iran set last month. And we'll have to see if in Vienna, when the countries that are still party to this deal meet, if they can persuade Iran to continue abiding by the deal. It's still, I would stress, Iran, as far as the Joint Commission under this nuclear agreement is concerned, is still abiding by the deal.
All right, but
and we'll have to see if it actually breaches its commitment as it's threatened to do.
yeah, and as we know, though, as you also mentioned, that one part of that deal, the U.S. has pulled out of the JCPOA, and Donald Trump obviously had a lot to say on this issue. Let's listen to what he had to say.
You know what? Iran can do whatever they want. It's just fine. I have plenty of time. But they have a country that's in economic distress. It's an economic disaster right now. They could solve it quickly, or they can solve it in 10 years from now. Whatever they want is fine with me. Whatever they want. I have all the time in the world. I'm sitting here, I have all the time in the world.
Now, Donald Trump seems to say that the ball is in Iran's court. Just very quickly, Ellie, if the EU, if push comes to shove and the EU had to take a side, EU governments will be more tempted to take the side of the US. Is this a smart strategic move?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're sliding towards the US position. The US administration has put a lot of pressure on the E3 governments, Germany, France, and Britain, to actually withdraw from the agreement altogether. They've managed to stick together, keep unified. And I think if Iran does breach some of the limits, the European countries are going to take a very pragmatic approach. They're going to be calculated to prevent this from escalating further. And even if they do snap back, for example, European-level sanctions, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to side with this maximum pressure campaign that President Trump has rolled out on Iran that so far has been very destructive. There is a middle path that I think the Europeans can take.
All right, thank you for that, Ellie Guren-Maye, for joining us on the program. And joining us to discuss this in the studio are Andreas Schwab, a German MEP from the European People's Party, and still with us, Jutta Guteland, the Swedish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats group, and Witold Wachikowski, a Polish MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists group. Okay, let's pick up on what she was saying there. Andreas, I'll ask you, the EU is pretty much between a rock and a hard place here. What is the way forward?
I mean, first of all, I think it's obvious that we want to stick to that agreement with Iran, which is only about uranium. It's not about any other stuff where also the Europeans have a negative impression of Iran's role in the region. But here we speak only about uranium. And if we don't manage this to be kept together, we risk a lot in the region. And therefore, I think Europeans should stick also in the long run that Iran respects that agreement. And we should also argue in the US, which is much more than Donald Trump, that we try to convince the Iranians to stick to that agreement.
Is there enough to convince them, though? Is there enough to offer them? I mean, there's a possibility that there will be a new multi-million credit line as they meet tomorrow in Vienna. There's a possibility that there will be new ideas and ways to soften the sanction blow. But is there really enough to convince Iran to stick to the deal?
I think Iran has the most to win to stick to the nuclear agreement. I think that it's more unpredictable to do other things.
Even when the US has pulled out?
Even though, and I would say that the EU can be the part that makes it stable and makes the surrounding world predictable for Iran, and we can really take that third road and show leadership.
And Witold, as a former ambassador to Iran, do you believe? What's your reading on how the Iranian government is acting at this point? Are they bluffing? What is it?
Now, first of all, I want to say that it's a very imperfect agreement, because the only benefit we have is that we got some kind of instrument to verify and to monitor some part of the military industry in Iran. But all other benefits are on the Iranian side. I mean, the whole system is frozen. They still keep it, the whole fuel cycle. The program of missile is totally not covered by this. And of course, they are benefiting from lack of sanction. Some Europeans are also benefiting from lack of sanction. What they really want, this is a very proud country and proud nation. They really want to be respected as a superpower. So the only guarantees they accept will be the guarantee that regime will be not changed. Who will give them such a guarantee that regime will be not changed? And this is the problem. This is a problem of diplomacy, psychology, and not the military
But then
situation.
time is ticking because there's been a clock placed on this. You know, so time is ticking, and somebody's got to make a move. So where do you see that happening? You talked about uranium earlier. So Iran said that today would have breached that, but according to the UN nuclear inspectors, it could be this weekend. And so when that happens, then what? The EU would have to act.
Exactly, and I'm not sure as to whether we are really that strong than to play an independent role from the Americans so far. We have always said that we want to do it. I think it would be nice if we could do it, but we should be realistic. Even though we may see that this is also in a certain way part of the presidential election campaign in the US, it will be very difficult for us if Iran has broken the agreement not to work further with the Americans in the same line. As we agree, by the way, that Iran is playing a destructive role in the region.
So it's unrealistic to have a separate role from the Americans? Sorry, go ahead.
One additional thing. One additional. For Iranian after the revolution, Islamic revolution, anti-American is a crucial part of the doctrine of the existence of this country. So if they make a deal with the United States, they will lose legitimacy. So that's also the problem.
But they did. They signed on to the JCPOA. Okay.
To say that EU should have a more independent role is not to say that we should not make sure that Iran delivers on its commitments. That is absolutely clear. And that's the signal that the EU needs to take. But on the other hand, we need to show that the US is not being... they have nothing to win to escalate the conflict with Iran. And they would not hold for another conflict in the Middle East. And they have nothing to win from that. And we need to show that this is a bit of a charade on the same time from the president.
And very quickly, do you think the US is convinced that they have nothing to gain by pushing a conflict with Iran?
I mean, the US at the moment is a little bit of a broad concept. I think Trump is definitely trying to put pressure there also for him to be seen as a very strong leader of the United States of America. And as you said, and I think rightly so, the Iranians are so, let's say, difficult to have any agreement with the Americans. It would be rather useful if they would be more, let's say, reluctant and a little bit more silent and not pushing them that strongly in that direction.
They have to justify the Islamic revolution somehow. They have to justify this revolution.
Okay, so we have a lot more coming up, a lot more discussions for you. Race for the top. Darren catches up with an EU politics expert to break down who is still in the running for Commission President. Will there be any surprises? That's up next.
Jetzt sage ich mal, haben wir doch eine Verantwortung, alle miteinander für Europa. Und da würde ich mir wünschen, dass wir zu einer Lösung kommen, die das Spitzenkandidatenkonzept natürlich nicht ins Abseits stellt, aber die auch Europa handlungsfähig sein lässt. Und da müssen sich alle ein bisschen bewegen.
Welcome back to the program. That was Angela Merkel there calling for compromise as Europe struggles to work out who should replace Jean-Claude Juncker as Commission President. And they'll gather here in Brussels this weekend to try and come to a decision. But 1 month on from the EU election, there's no coronation in sight. Well, joining us to discuss the horse trading for the EU top job is Kate Bolongaro. She's an EU policy and politics reporter. And back with us is Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. And still with us, Andreas Schwab, a German MEP with the EPP here in the Parliament. Okay, but before we get everybody's opinion on the horse trading, really exciting, heating up. Darren, you spoke to someone and you guys tried to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, we went through some of the names, not all of the names, some of the names who potentially might still be in contention for the top job, at least as Commission President. Let's have a look. As Jean-Claude Juncker sits up in his office there in the Commission, I'm sure he is wondering, as much as we are, who his successor may well be. And you know what? We've got these mugshots of the potentials who might well take over, and we've got this man as well, John Worth, who knows more than a little about these things. Let's start, though, with this man, Manfred Weber, the man who many suggested from the start was the favourite, but seems out of favour at the moment.
He seems a bit out of favour, but the question is anyone else even more in favour than Manfred Weber? He's still the outright favourite, as I would say, because he comes from the biggest political group, the European People's Party, and he has the full backing of his group in the European Parliament. So he still, for me, is the favourite, even though he's a rather uninspiring choice to replace Juncker, the current Commission President.
Well, if it's not going to be him, many have suggested the compromise should be another EPP man, this man, Michel Barnier.
So Barnier's done an extremely good job in the Brexit negotiations. But Brexit is not yet solved, and the European Union has looked responsible during the Brexit negotiations in that it's been together, it's not been playing games with Brexit. If Barnier jumps out now and becomes Commission President, then the British will go, is the Commission taking this seriously? So I think he's needed for the Brexit negotiation. The time is not right for him to make that jump to be Commission President. So for him, almost, it's too early.
Too early for Barnier. Man's getting on in age. Could it be Margrethe Vestager?
It could be Vestager. Now, she is not from the European People's Party. She's from ALDE, the Liberals. The challenge here, and she's been an extremely good European Commissioner, she's a great communicator, and people who've worked with her would say she would be ideal for this job. The problem is the Liberals only came in as the third largest group in the European Parliament after the elections, and so therefore they need to get a deal between that group and other political groups to get Vestager the job.
Well, if she can't get it, you would have thought, and Manfred Weber can't. The other lead candidate who should be in a good position is this man, Franz Timmermans. He's an impressive character. Can he not build up a coalition within the Parliament and with the leaders?
He could, and certainly his relationship with the likes of Merkel or Macron, they could probably tolerate Timmermans. He's a very professional operator, compelling speaker, good in his media appearances. The challenge here is, to be blunt about it, it looks like you'd be backing a loser, because the Social Democrats in Europe as a whole have been struggling, not only this election, but in elections past as well.
And finally, we all recognise this face. She's ruled it out repeatedly. Clearly, though, Macron would like her to do it. Is it impossible?
I think it's impossible for two reasons. So Angela Merkel we're talking about, of course. Angela Merkel has said that she will not run again in 2021 to be German Chancellor once again. But at the moment, the German government is struggling. And so she's needed in Berlin to hold the German government together for the next couple of years. And second, can you imagine really what it would be like to have a Commission President that were that well known, that strong? Other countries would be very nervous about that, about how powerful that would make the European Commission. So, to draw all of that to a close, that's why, in the end, we come back to Weber. Because, in the end, he's the one who probably has the fewest downsides out of all of these people we've just talked through.
Thank you very much indeed. Problem is, of course, it might not be any of these people. I think Philip, our producer, is going to have to go back to the drawing board like the rest of us.
All right, Kate, what do you think? What's happening with these horse trading? It is heating up, getting exciting, but is the name going to come from that pile
well,
or
for certain
somewhere
people,
else, Kate?
Yeah, I know.
For the geeks amongst us.
Yeah, I think it's been a little bit anticlimactic for Mr. Weber, obviously. I think he thought that he had a really good chance of becoming the Commission President, and so far there has been strong opposition to him from French President Emmanuel Macron, for example. That's a big blow to somebody who wants to be leading the Commission and to be able to rally member states behind him to support his different policies and the different agendas that he's going to be pursuing over the next 5 years if he is successful in that. So I do think that there has been quite a bit of surprise in terms of who is it going to be.
Is there another name that you're looking at outside?
I really think that there could be Andrej Plenković. This is somebody who has been proposed as a viable and perhaps tolerable substitution. He's from the European People's Party. Yeah. He's Croatian. He's from the newest member states. He's done a very good job as current Croatian Prime Minister, and he's quite an interesting character. I mean, I've spoke to him several times at EU summits, and he's very friendly and very talkable. So I would be excited as a journalist to have him.
Throw in there. So Andreas, from the German side, Angela Merkel has stood by Weber, but then kind of might be backtracking. You said a little bit only. So what is that? I mean, where does that put Weber then?
No, I definitely have to say that Merkel and the other EPP leaders are standing behind him. But I think we also have to take into consideration, and I think John has also mentioned it, it's also a power game between council members and the parliament. And in fact, the council members believe that they are the driving force in that game, and they would prefer someone from their own ranks. And therefore, there is in difference to the last time, rather, let's say, a skepticism if a normal parliamentarian is up to the job. But I definitely believe in the member states it's like that possible. Why shouldn't it be possible in the European Union?
Well, there is going to be another summit, in fact, just talking about that, who is going to take the top job. So let's see, shall we? Okay, now there is a standoff with Brussels, another one, a government struggling to convince MPs to back a deal while preparing for a no-deal outcome. Does it sound familiar? But all is not as it seems. Let's take a look. Troubled waters. Switzerland. It's at the very heart of Europe, but not in the EU. And now it's at loggerheads with Brussels. The EU playing tough and preparing to cut off the Swiss financial centre from European markets at the end of this month. Switzerland says it's prepared for a no deal, a move which could prevent EU banks and brokers from trading on Swiss exchanges. So what's it all about? Well, Switzerland has a patchwork of deals with the EU, which allows it to trade in the single market, but doesn't have to follow all the bloc's rules. The EU, for its part, wants to formalize this relationship, increasing Switzerland's access and bringing it in line with the single market members. But there's resistance. Swiss politicians resisting the handing over of control to Brussels and the weakening of labor laws. All eyes are now on the lookout for stock market fragility next week. And for Brexit Britain, could this offer a glimpse of its own trade deal showdown? I mean, it does. This is interesting because, you know, I think the EU is trying to be strong on this stand because you have Brexit going on one hand. What do you think? What do you make of this stand-up between Switzerland and
definitely
Brussels?
Could be something to come for the UK, and it does seem like the EU is trying to take a stand and show that it is strong and it's going to stay strong, especially united vis-a-vis the UK.
The UK is watching very closely.
Exactly, exactly. And with the run for the Conservative leadership with Boris Johnson in the lead, I think also they're trying to show, Boris Johnson, you're trying to show that you're going to take a tough stance with us. We're going to take a tough stance with you when we do have to, if we do have to be dealing with you in the future if he does win the Conservative leader race.
Okay, all right. Coming up on Raw Politics, a migrant rescue boat defies Matteo Salvini and enters Italian waters. Are rescue groups becoming too political? We want to hear from you. Your call is coming up at 7 p.m. Brussels time after this program, and the contact information is on your screen. You can call us for free at 00800 3333 7002, and you can get in on the debate using the hashtag #RawPolitics. Our lines are opening soon after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. So tonight we are back with your call at 7 p.m. Brussels time and 6 p.m. if you are in the UK and in Ireland. Darren, our political editor, he's hosting tonight, and he will be joined by Kate Bolongaro. And still with us to talk about this, Jutta Gutteland. Okay, so Darren, what are the topics? Every night, three questions that we ask our viewers.
We can't get away, at least from the heat, that there's any part of Europe that is not essentially on the verge of boiling point today and over the weekend. And we're reflecting that by asking what you think of the climate and the sunshine outside. Let's have a look at tonight's hot topics. Feeling the heat. Just 6 days into summer and Europe is sweltering in record-breaking temperatures. As scientists say heat waves are amplified by climate change, it's an issue expected to come up here at the G20 summit in Japan. France's Emmanuel Macron insists he won't sign the communiqué if he doesn't mention the Paris Climate Accord. But this comes after a report finds Paris is falling behind on its emission targets. And Emmanuel Macron's fuel tax U-turn amid those yellow vest protests. Meanwhile, the UK is vowing to go carbon neutral by 2050, a timeline critics say is simply too late. So we're asking, are politicians environmental hypocrites? In an act of defiance, a boat carrying migrants rescued from the Mediterranean arrives in the Italian port of Lampedusa, just weeks after Rome bans rescue vessels from its ports. The European Court of Human Rights has backed Italy, ruling that it has no obligation to allow migrants to disembark. So as the ship's captain says he's ready to go to jail over the decision, we're asking, are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? And Angela Merkel appears to shake at a ceremony today for the second time in less than 2 weeks. Concerns were first raised when the German Chancellor was seen shaking or welcoming the Ukrainian president to Berlin this month. She brushed it off as dehydration last time, and this time her spokesperson said the Chancellor is doing fine. Meanwhile, over in the US, the president undergoes an annual health check with the results made public. So we want to know, should a leader's health ever be private? Come on, Europe, have your say. Are politicians environmental hypocrites? Are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? And should a leader's health ever be private? And you know what to do? Get in touch, pick up the phone. It is free, 00800 333 702. We really want to hear from you. You can also email us at robhall@euronews.com. We'd love to see you if you want. You can get on Skype and join us on that using Raw Politics. Or indeed, if you're on Twitter and Facebook, hashtag Raw Politics.
Right, let's quickly touch on the migration story. That are Mediterranean rescue groups too political? I mean, this is consistently a big story in the EU. So the European Court of Human Rights says Italy has no obligation to let the ship in. What do you think? Are rescue boats in the Mediterranean especially getting too political rather than just, you know, doing the humanitarian bit of the work?
The important thing is the humanitarian work, that for sure. I think this shows that the situation in Italy is very, very complex, and that we have politicians with very different views. Also, when we hear Salvini, we know that we also have others who really opposite. And I also think this sends the message to the European Union that we need to cooperate now to make sure that everyone takes their responsibility. That's what I'm bringing with me.
Because the boat has been there for about 2 weeks now. I mean, Salvini was saying the boat is registered to the Netherlands, so why not bring them to the Netherlands? I mean, does he have a point? And the court did side with Italy on this.
Well, I do think that all European countries do have a responsibility to help each other and have solidarity on this topic, as Jojo was saying, that it's super important that they work together to be able to address this. So obviously Salvini could have a point in terms of it's his right to have jurisdiction over Italian territorial waters. However, his responsibility as an EU leader is to also be working to find a European-wide solution to this. And I think that having extremist perspectives on migration don't always help to be able to come to a cohesive solution. Which is why
to be fair to Salvini, though, he does want an EU-wide solution, and there's other countries, most notably places like Hungary and Poland, that aren't terribly keen on it, among others. I think, are they being too political? I mean, they're certainly being political. I don't think you can deny that. But ultimately, their job becomes a little bit fruitless if they are in the Mediterranean saving people's lives, but can't physically take them anywhere.
Is that the role that they can play as well?
Well, ultimately, if they are to try and rescue people and essentially to save their lives and to take them somewhere, they have to fight the political battle of being able to actually take them somewhere.
But what about you? What do you think? Do you think that rescue boats are getting too political? And the other questions that we're asking you, here's a reminder on how to get in touch. There's several ways. So you can call us, again, for free at 00800 333 7002. Write to us, rawpaul@euronews.com. And on social media, just use the hashtag #RawPolitics, and also on Skype. You can find us there. All right, before we go, we have tonight's Raw Moment. It comes from the UK, where it seems a weight has finally been lifted from Theresa May's shoulders. Let's have a look.
So, while we will never, excuse me, while our opponents flirt with a foreign policy of neutrality and prepare for a run on the ground that was shared around the globe. It's a pleasure to be with you all today at Europe's largest housing festival. I have to say, however, I was a little apprehensive when I heard where you were holding your meeting this year. The last time I visited this venue, it was hosting the 2017 Conservative Party conference, when it's fair to say I had 1 or 2 problems with my speech. I think the backdrop is pretty solid. There's somebody waiting with some cough sweets if I need them. And just in case anyone's planning to run on stage with a P45, you're a little bit late.
That's
Who
a
knew,
nice
who
different
knew
side
it?
of Theresa
She's
May,
the
isn't
ability
it?
to be funny. Apparently, she's very funny in private, but you know what? Maybe if we saw a little bit more of that Theresa
I
May
know.
over the last 3
Do you like what you
years.
saw?
But she has been funny. She was dancing on public
That is
trips.
true.
I thought that was fantastic. I mean, I don't know any other leader that would dare to do the boogie that she was doing when she.
And you can clearly feel that the weight is off her shoulders. I think you can
Exactly.
see a different side of her. All right, thank you very much for watching, and we'd love to hear your views. Again, you can call in on the Your Call program after Raw Politics. Use the hashtag Raw Politics on social media. Thank you for watching. See you soon.